Have you ever received a gift from a loved one? A gift that should have been a token of happiness, but instead became the beginning of a tragedy that tore your entire life apart. I have, and the scar it left will probably never fade in this lifetime. My husband sent me a beautiful dress and called to ask if I liked it. At that moment, in a fit of resentment, I could only complain with one sentence: "Your sister took it." But on the other end of the phone, he screamed like a madman. A sentence that to this day, after so many years, still haunts me like a knife wound. "You've killed my sister. My name is Sophia. I'm 30 years old and have been married to Matthew for almost 3 years. My life as a daughter-in-law is probably like that of many other women. I have tasted both the sweet and the bitter. My husband's family isn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but they are among the most comfortable in this part of the Hudson Valley. The house has 3 people: my mother-in-law, Isabel, my husband, and my husband's younger sister, Clara. Everything would be very normal if it weren't for the extraordinarily special existence of Clara. Clara, my sister-in-law, is 5 years younger than me. She possesses a beauty as fragile as smoke, with pale skin, long hair, and eyes that always seem to be on the verge of tears. But that fragility is not just external, but physical as well. My mother-in-law says that since she was a child, Clara has suffered from a strange illness, a monstrous allergy to most common fabrics. If just one foreign fiber touches her skin, the girl can break out in rashes, have difficulty breathing, and even suffer convulsions. That's why the whole family protects her, as if she were a porcelain treasure, easily broken. Everything in the house, from her clothes to her bedsheets, must be custom ordered from a special type of silk, incredibly expensive and hard to find. My life in that house, to be fair, has been a succession of days filled with patience and restraint. My mother-in-law, Isabel, is a sharp, authoritarian woman. She loves her daughter to the point of blindness. Everything best in the house is for Clara. As for me, a newly arrived daughter-in-law, in her eyes, I seem to be just a stranger, someone who has come to serve this family. The food I prepare is not to her liking. The house I clean is not clean enough for her. Even the way I breathe seems to displease her. "Sophia, walk slower. You'll startle Clara. Sophia, speak softer. Clara is resting." Those phrases became the familiar refrain of my life. My husband, Matthew, is a completely different person. He is kind, soft-spoken, and always treats me very well. Every time his mother scolded me, he would quietly enter the room, take my hand, and comfort me. "Honey, don't be upset. Mom just worries too much about Clara. Have a little patience, okay?" He is like a soft cushion, helping me absorb the blows from my mother-in-law. But gradually, I realize that he is only a cushion. He has never been a solid shield. He can soothe my sadness, but he has never dared to defend me in front of his mother and sister. His love for me is real, but the affection and protection he dedicates to Clara are immeasurably greater. And then the fateful day arrived. It was our 2nd wedding anniversary. Matthew was away on a business trip. I thought he had forgotten, but in the afternoon, a delivery driver brought a beautiful gift box. I opened it, and my heart seemed to stop for a moment. Inside was a jade green silk dress, soft and cool. The design was simple but incredibly elegant. I knew it was the same type of expensive silk the family used for Clara. It was the first time since we married that Matthew had given me such a valuable and refined gift. I hugged the dress to my chest, feeling a happiness that coursed through my entire body. Maybe he still remembered. Maybe I still held an important place in his heart. I took the dress to my room and happily tried it on in front of the mirror. The dress seemed to be made for me. It perfectly enhanced my skin and figure. I thought that for once, I could wear it with him to some romantic place, but I was wrong. Just as I was leaving the room, Clara was coming down the stairs. She saw the dress I was wearing, and her eyes lit up in a strange way. She said nothing, just came closer and, with her thin, trembling hand, lightly brushed the fabric of the dress. At that very moment, my mother-in-law came out of the kitchen, saw the scene, and her face immediately darkened. She quickly approached, pushed Clara's hand away, and turned to me with a sharp voice. "Sophia, who gave you permission to wear that dress? Can't you see Clara likes it? Why don't you have a little more consideration?" I was frozen, unable to explain, as she snatched the dress from my body and placed it in Clara's arms. "Here, my child, if you like it, wear it. Your sister-in-law has plenty of nice clothes. She won't miss this one." I stood petrified in the middle of the living room, as if a bucket of ice water had been thrown over me. The dress was a gift from my husband, my anniversary gift, but in my mother-in-law's eyes, it was just something she could take from me at will to please her daughter. Clara hugged the dress with a faint expression of remorse, but then she turned silently and went up to her room, leaving me alone with a lump of humiliation in my throat. That night, I couldn't eat a bite at dinner. I sat alone in my room, staring at the empty box, and tears began to well up. Just then, the phone rang. It was Matthew. His voice on the other end of the line was unusually warm and tender. "Hello, my love. Did you get my gift?" Hearing his voice, all the pent-up frustration in me overflowed. I tried to hold back my sobs and replied in a whisper, "Yes, I received it. It's beautiful, but I don't think it was meant for me." Matthew asked, surprised, "Why do you say that? Don't you like it?" Without thinking, I complained exactly how I felt, a complaint with a touch of a wife's spite. "Your sister saw it and took it. Mom also told me to give it to her. How could I refuse?" I thought he would comfort me as he always did, that he would say sweet words to calm me down. But no. A silence of several seconds on the other end of the line made me uneasy. Suddenly, he screamed. A crazed, furious scream filled with panic. His voice was no longer that of the kind husband I knew. It transformed into the roar of a wounded beast. "What did you say? That she took it? You've killed her. You've killed my sister." That scream was like a lightning bolt that split me in two. I was stunned. My ears were ringing. The phone slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. My whole world collapsed in that instant. Kill. What had I done? Just because of a dress? Why would he say such terrible words? What was the secret behind that dress? Behind his family? Matthew's scream through the phone wasn't just a sound. It was a tangible object, an invisible hammer that struck my mind with force. I lost my balance. My body swayed, and my head spun in a nameless chaos. Kill. Who had I killed? Over a dress, I had become a murderer, according to my own husband. I hadn't even had time to recover, to pick up the phone lying inert on the cold floor, when from the main entrance, the screech of brakes tore through the silent night. The iron gate was pushed open with brutal violence, creating a terrifying crash. Then the sound of footsteps, not of someone walking quickly, but of someone running desperately. The pounding of shoes on the patio tiles sounded like war drums. Before I could understand what was happening, a figure burst into the house like a whirlwind. It was Matthew, but not the Matthew I knew. His hair was disheveled, his work shirt rumpled, and his eyes, my God, his eyes were bloodshot, crisscrossed with red veins like a crazed wild animal. He didn't look at me, even though I was standing right in front of him. His gaze swept the living room, and then he lunged up the stairs toward Clara's room. He shoved me aside, a heedless push that made me stagger and almost fall. Horrified, I followed him up, my steps feeling like lead. From Clara's room, the desperate wails of my mother-in-law could already be heard. "Clara, my child, why are you like this? Wake up, please." When I reached the doorway of the room, a gruesome scene froze me to the spot. Clara, my fragile sister-in-law, was curled up on the floor, convulsing. Beside her, the jade-green dress lay crumpled. Her whole body was shaking in spasms. Her eyes were rolled back, lifeless, and white foam was bubbling from the corner of her lips. My mother-in-law was kneeling beside her, pounding the floor with her fists while frantically shaking her daughter. Her face was bathed in tears, mixed with an infinite rage. Seeing me at the door, Isabel reacted like a wild beast spotting its enemy. She leaped up and lunged at me, her eyes burning with hatred. You witch! You've hurt my daughter. You came to this house to kill her, didn't you?" she screamed, raising her hand to slap me. But Matthew stopped her just in time. He didn't stop her to protect me, but to restrain his mother. "Mom, calm down. We have to call an ambulance. We need to get her to the hospital now." I stood there, rooted to the spot. My mind was blank, unable to think. What the hell was happening? Why was Clara like this? The dress. Yes, it was all because of the dress. But a dress can't cause harm. It's not poison or a dagger. What did I do wrong? I only received a gift my own husband had sent me. Amid the chaos, Matthew lifted Clara into his arms. The girl was still convulsing, her body limp in her brother's arms. Isabel ran after them, relentlessly cursing me with the most venomous words. "Snake! Vixen! Get out of my house! Cursed be the hour you entered here!" When Matthew passed me, he paused for a second. He looked at me, but his gaze held no trace of yesterday's tenderness. It was cold, distant, and filled with hatred, a look one gives a mortal enemy. He hissed each word through his teeth like a knife in my heart. "You're still here. Get out of my sight." I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe painfully. I watched them, a mother crazed for her daughter, a brother terrified for his sister, rush Clara to the car and disappear into the night. They left me alone in the immense house. The house suddenly became terrifyingly silent. The silence after the storm is even more chilling than the screams. I walked, trembling, into Clara's room. The room was a mess, as if there had been a struggle. The empty gift box lay in the middle of the room, and the dress, that fateful jade-green dress, was still there, crumpled on the cold floor. I slowly bent down, picking it up with shaking hands. It was still the same soft, cool silk, the same transparent green color as a lake's water. But now, in my eyes, it was no longer a gift of happiness. It looked like the evidence of a crime, a deadly curse that I, unknowingly, had activated. I don't know how long I sat there. My body was cold, not from the night wind, but from a chill that rose from the depths of my soul. My own husband, the person I loved and trusted most, had accused me of being a murderer. My mother-in-law had cursed and expelled me, and all of this had happened in less than an hour. What have I done? I asked myself hundreds, thousands of times, but I couldn't find an answer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, looking out at the empty yard. I waited for a call. I waited for Matthew to come back and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But there was nothing, only the dense darkness and an invisible fear surrounding me. I knew that from the moment Matthew screamed that phrase over the phone, my life had changed forever. My marriage, which I thought was peaceful, concealed a terrible secret, a secret in which, whether I liked it or not, I was already involved. I had to find out the truth, not just to clear my name, but also to understand why the husband I loved so much could look at me with the eyes of a mortal enemy. Just before dawn, I fell asleep on the cold sofa. My body was curled up from exhaustion, but even that intermittent sleep was filled with nightmares. I saw Matthew and my mother-in-law standing before me, their eyes ablaze, endlessly repeating, "You killed her." I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. Dawn was breaking through the window, but for me, the night seemed to still envelop everything. Around 8 a.m., the sound of a car stopping outside the gate startled me. My heart pounded. I ran to the door with a glimmer of hope. Maybe Clara was fine. Maybe Matthew had calmed down and would explain everything. But that hope vanished as soon as the car door opened. Only my mother-in-law and Matthew got out. Their faces were haggard, with dark circles under their eyes, and filled with hatred when they saw me. Isabel walked past me like a shadow without a word and went straight into the house. Matthew, however, stopped in front of me. The distance between us was barely an arm's length, but I felt an abyss separating us. With a trembling, dry voice after a sleepless night, I asked, "Clara, how is Clara?" He looked at me, a strangely terrifying look. His dry lips moved, uttering a phrase as cold as ice. "She's not dead, but it's as if she is." With that, he also sidestepped me and went inside. I felt as if someone were squeezing my heart. His words were not just news, they were a condemnation, an affirmation that this entire tragedy was my fault. From that day on, my life in that house officially became a hell. They brought Clara home after a day in the hospital, but she had become terrifyingly silent. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just sat in a corner of her room, staring blankly out the window. Occasionally, she would startle and tremble as if seeing something horrible. My mother-in-law took care of everything related to Clara. She wouldn't let me near the girl's room. If she saw me lingering in the hallway, she would yell, "How long do you want to hurt her? Stay away from her." I became an invisible shadow in my own home. No, not invisible, but a disgusting creature everyone wanted to avoid. Isabel began to torment me openly. She made me do all the household chores, from laundry and cooking to cleaning and even digging in the garden. She wouldn't let me eat with them at the same table. My meals consisted of leftovers, which I ate hastily in a corner of the kitchen. At night, Matthew no longer slept with me. He moved into his study and locked the door. Our marital bedroom now housed only me, surrounded by 4 cold walls. I tried many times to talk to Matthew. I intercepted him on the stairs. I waited for him in the living room. I looked for any opportunity to ask him a single question. What secret did that dress hide? Why had everything become like this? But all I received was a terrifying silence, or words full of hatred. You don't need to know. The best thing you can do is shut up and do your duty. If anything happens to Clara, I will never forgive you. My duty. What was my duty now? To be an unpaid maid, a culprit with no right to speak. My tears had dried up. The physical pain from the grueling work didn't break me as much as the spiritual pain of being treated like an enemy by the man I loved. The whole house was shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere. My mother-in-law and Matthew seemed to have reached a tacit agreement, turning the secret about Clara's illness and the dress into a taboo subject. Every time I tried to mention it, they either ignored me or used venomous words to shut me up. My life went on like this, between torment and humiliation. I lost weight. My eyes sank into dark circles from lack of sleep and worry. Sometimes, looking at myself in the mirror, I no longer recognized myself. The woman in the mirror had an empty, tired gaze, marked by the wrinkles of suffering. But when a person is pushed to the limit, the survival instinct emerges. I couldn't let myself die slowly in this silence. I couldn't accept being blamed so irrationally. I had done nothing wrong. Their silence, the abnormally excessive protection of Clara, it all indicated that behind it lay a terrible secret, a secret they were trying to bury at all costs. And I was the scapegoat for that secret. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, I saw my mother-in-law sneak into Clara's room with a small black paper bag in her hand. She looked around with a tense expression. When she came out, she no longer had the bag. A feeling told me something was wrong. I waited for her to disappear and tiptoed to Clara's room. Her door was always locked, but today, perhaps in her haste, she hadn't locked it completely. It was just ajar, a small crack enough to peer inside. And what I saw through that narrow gap made my blood run cold. It wasn't the room of a normal sick person. It looked more like a prison cell, sophisticatedly disguised. My blood froze in my veins as I peered through the crack in Clara's bedroom door. It wasn't just a feeling of horror, but also of overwhelming confusion. The girl's room, which I had previously only considered a space with special care, now revealed a completely different face. The window was not a normal glass window. It had a layer of thin iron bars painted white to match the color of the wall. If you didn't look closely, it was impossible to detect them. On the desk, next to the vases of fresh flowers my mother-in-law placed daily, were stacks of neatly arranged textbooks, but they were all old high school books. And what shocked me most was Clara's bed. It wasn't a normal wooden bed, but a hospital-style iron bed with railings on both sides. Why would a 25-year-old woman need to sleep in a bed like that in her own home? Why did the window have bars? Why did my mother-in-law have to bring her things secretly as if she were doing something shady? A flood of questions swirled in my mind, transforming my accumulated frustration into a burning determination. I couldn't continue living in this torment and ambiguity. I had to find out the truth at any cost. From that day on, I stopped being the submissive, silent daughter-in-law. I began to watch, to listen, and to memorize every unusual detail in that house. I pretended to be busy working in the yard, but my ears were always alert, trying to catch any movement inside. I noticed that every day at 5 p.m. sharp, my mother-in-law would personally prepare an herbal tea. The smell was strong and somewhat pungent, very strange. She never let me touch it, nor did she tell me what it was. She would simply take it silently to Clara. After drinking the tea, Clara would sleep soundly until the next morning, without having dinner. Once, taking advantage of Isabel's carelessness, I secretly took a small amount of the leftover herb dregs from the teapot, wrapped them in a small piece of paper, and hid them well. I didn't know what it was, but my instinct told me it was a piece of the puzzle. My husband Matthew remained cold and distant. He barely spoke to me, came home late at night, and locked himself in his study. But I realized that his coldness was not purely hatred. There was a hidden torment and fear within it. Some nights, passing by his study, I would hear his deep, anguished sighs. Once, I even heard him talk in his sleep. "It's not your fault. I'm sorry." Those fragmented words were like loose pieces of a puzzle that only made the mystery more confusing. The real opportunity came one weekend night. Matthew said he had to meet an important client and would be back very late. My mother-in-law had a family dinner at a distant relative's house. Before leaving, she locked Clara's room door as usual and warned me to take good care of the house and under no circumstances to go upstairs. Her warnings only strengthened my determination. When I was left alone in the house, my heart pounded. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. But how could I get into that locked room? I paced back and forth downstairs, my head about to explode. Suddenly, I remembered a set of spare keys that my father-in-law, before he died, used to hang behind the door of an old kitchen cabinet. My father-in-law used to say they were the keys to all the rooms in the house for emergencies. Trembling, I opened the cabinet door, my heart in my throat. And yes, it was still there. The old key ring hung silently from a rusty nail. I clutched it in my hand, feeling as if I were holding the key that opened the gates of hell. I tiptoed up the stairs. Each step was so light it barely made a sound. Standing in front of Clara's door, I took a deep breath to calm myself. My hands were shaking so much that it took me a moment to get the key into the lock. A dry click echoed in the silence, and the door opened. But just as I was about to enter, the phone downstairs started ringing shrilly. I jumped, almost screaming. It was the landline. Who would call at this hour? My heart raced. What if it was my mother-in-law calling to check on me? I quickly pulled out the key, closed the door, and ran downstairs. I picked up the phone with a trembling voice. "Hello?" On the other end, a gruff, unfamiliar man's voice resonated. There was something in that voice, both familiar and strange, that chilled my blood. He didn't ask who I was, just said one sentence, a sentence full of insinuation and threat. "Don't try to find out what you shouldn't know. The punishment of the past is not something just anyone can bear." With that, he hung up. I stood frozen with the phone still pressed to my ear. The punishment of the past. What did those words have to do with this family's secret? Who was that man? Why did he know I was trying to uncover the truth? A whirlwind of questions assaulted me, and I realized that the secret I was trying to unearth was much deeper and more dangerous than I had imagined. The mysterious phone call ended, but the unknown man's words kept ringing in my ears, cold and threatening. The punishment of the past. That phrase was like a warning, an invisible wall blocking my path, but strangely, it didn't make me back down. On the contrary, it ignited in me a curiosity more intense than ever. Clearly, someone outside this family also knew the secret and didn't want me to meddle. That only proved that this matter was not simply a family tragedy. I stood motionless in the middle of the house for a long time, trying to calm my racing heart. The fear was still there, but the need to find the truth to save myself surpassed everything. I couldn't continue living like a puppet in this tragic play. I turned around without hesitation and went back upstairs. This time, I no longer felt tremors, but a cold determination. I reinserted the old key into the lock. Clara's bedroom door opened again, and a gust of damp, stale air hit my face, very different from the soft lavender scent my mother-in-law usually used in the room. The room was impeccably tidy, everything meticulously arranged, without the slightest trace of a young woman's life. It looked more like a museum exhibit than a place to live. My eyes scanned the room. The hospital-style iron bed, the white bars on the window, the stack of old textbooks. Everything exuded a strange abnormality. I began to search as delicately and carefully as possible. I opened the closet. Inside were only a few silk pajamas and some loungewear. All of a monotonous design, without color, not a single dress, nothing appropriate for a girl in the prime of her life. I checked the desk drawers. I only found a few pens and blank notebooks, without a single word written, no diaries, no letters, nothing that reflected Clara's personal life. It was as if an invisible hand had deliberately erased all traces of her existence, leaving only a perfect facade. I was about to despair. Maybe they had hidden everything too well. I was about to give up and leave before my mother-in-law returned. But when my gaze casually fell under the bed, I stopped. Under the iron bed, in the darkest corner, was something rectangular covered by a thin layer of dust. My heart sped up. I knelt and tried to reach it. My fingers touched a rough, cold wooden surface. It was an old wooden box, not very large, with some simple floral engravings that had worn down over time. The box had no lock, just a small, tarnished brass latch. I held my breath and slowly pulled it into the light. My hands trembled as I opened the lid. Inside, there were no medicines or precious jewels. It was filled with a jumble of objects, things that seemed insignificant. An old, tattered rag doll, a butterfly-shaped hair clip with a broken wing, several yellowed photographs of an unknown girl with a radiant smile. And underneath everything, what shocked me the most was a stack of old newspaper clippings, carefully cut and arranged. The pages were yellowed with time, but the large, bold headlines were still clearly legible. I shakily picked up a clipping. The headline struck my eyes. Tragic traffic accident on Route 9W. University student dies instantly. I hastily read the lines below. The article described an accident that occurred on a rainy afternoon almost 10 years ago. A car lost control and hit a girl riding her bicycle on the shoulder. The victim was a sophomore in the School of Education at Columbia University with a promising future ahead of her. The article did not specify the driver's identity, only stating that the case was still under investigation. My throat went dry. I moved on to the other clippings. They all reported on the same accident, cut from different newspapers. One even published a blurry photo of the accident scene. A twisted bicycle, a bloodstain spreading on the wet asphalt. I shivered. A chill ran down my spine. Why were clippings about a tragic accident from 10 years ago kept so carefully in Clara's room? Was the girl in the yellowed photos the unfortunate victim? My mind spun with countless theories. What connection did this accident have with my husband's family secret? Why was Clara keeping these things? Was this the cause of her strange illness? Was the punishment of the past that the mysterious man referred to precisely this accident? I quickly photographed all the clippings with my phone. I didn't dare take them for fear of being discovered. I carefully put everything back in its place, erasing any trace. Just as I was closing Clara's bedroom door, I heard the familiar sound of my mother-in-law's car in the driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. She was back earlier than expected. I rushed downstairs, went into the kitchen, and pretended to be cleaning. She had almost caught me red-handed, and I knew that if I were discovered, the consequences would be unimaginable. My mother-in-law entered the house. Her sharp gaze swept over me from head to toe. I tried to keep my head down, pretending to be busy cleaning, my heart still pounding from the scare. Luckily, she didn't notice anything unusual. She just muttered something about how tired she was of the family dinner and went straight up to her room to rest. I sighed in relief, but the sense of security was only temporary. In my pocket, the phone with the photos of the newspaper clippings burned like a hot coal, giving me hope of finding the truth, but also capable of burning me at any moment. I couldn't sleep a wink that night. I locked myself in my room, reviewing the photos over and over. The radiant face of the girl in the yellowed photos, the tragic headlines about the accident, it all replayed in my mind. I was sure this was the key to deciphering all the tragedies happening in this house. But what should I do? Confront my mother-in-law with this? She would surely deny everything and even accuse me of making it up. Finally, I decided that the only person I could talk to at this moment was Matthew. Although he had treated me cruelly, although he had sided with his family, deep in his eyes, I still saw torment. He wasn't completely heartless. He is my husband, and he owes me an explanation. I waited 2 days until the opportunity came. My mother-in-law said she had to go to her parents' town for a few days to sort out some family matters. Only I, Matthew, and Clara, locked silently in her room, were left at home. That night, after a dinner for two in suffocating silence, I saw Matthew preparing to lock himself in his study again. I took a deep breath, gathered all my courage, and stood in front of him. "Matthew, I need to talk to you. Just this once. I'm begging you, don't run away anymore." Matthew looked up, his expression tired and somewhat irritated. "What is it now?" "I've already told you there's nothing to talk about." I didn't back down. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice trembling but firm. "Yes, there is. We need to talk about an accident, a tragic accident on Route 9W almost 10 years ago." Upon hearing this, Matthew's face changed. The irritation vanished, replaced by an undeniable panic. He stared at me, his lips trembling. "How do you know about that?" "What I know isn't important. What's important is that you tell me the truth." I held up my phone and showed him the photos of the newspaper clippings. "Who is this girl? Why are articles about her death kept in Clara's room?" Matthew looked at the phone screen and froze. He took a step back and collapsed into a nearby chair, clutching his head in his hands. His silence lasted for several minutes, a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush a horrifying past. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red, his voice hoarse. "Since you know, I won't hide it from you anymore." He began to speak, his voice choked, as if each word were a knife stabbing his own chest. "That accident was real. The girl in the photo was named Lucy. She was the victim, and the person who caused the accident was Clara." My ears were ringing. Although I had suspected it, hearing it confirmed from Matthew's own mouth left me in shock. He continued, "It was a rainy afternoon. Clara, who was only 16 at the time, secretly took our father's car to practice driving. She was too inexperienced, and with the rain and the slippery road, she lost control and hit Lucy, who was riding her bike in the same direction. Lucy died instantly. After the accident, Clara went into such a state of panic she nearly went insane," Matthew said, his voice filled with pain. "She wouldn't stop screaming and crying, hitting her head against the wall, saying she had killed someone. My parents were desperate too. On one hand, they loved their daughter, but on the other, they were terrified she would go to jail. You know, Clara has always been in delicate health. If she had to go to prison, she probably wouldn't survive." "So your family covered it all up?" I asked, a lump in my throat. Matthew nodded, avoiding my gaze. "My parents had to use a lot of money and connections to fix it. They gave the victim's family a large sum of money, and somehow the case was closed without finding the culprit. But for Clara, the shock was too great. From that day on, she has lived tormented by guilt and fear. She has nightmares every night, and her health keeps deteriorating. That's the reason she has to live with so much special care. Her illness isn't an allergy, it's an illness of the soul." Hearing the story, I fell silent. A part of me felt pity for Clara, a girl who had to endure such a great tragedy at such a young age, but another part of me felt a growing unease. Matthew's story seemed logical. It explained why Clara behaved so strangely. But if that was all, why did my mother-in-law have to secretly give her that strange herbal tea every day? If it was just psychological trauma, why did they have to lock her in a room with bars on the windows? And most importantly, what did all this have to do with the jade green dress? Why could a simple dress make Clara so gravely ill to the point of nearly dying, and make Matthew scream that I had killed his sister? I looked at Matthew. My gaze was no longer one of fear like in the early days, but of scrutiny, of analysis. I knew the story he had just told was not the whole truth. It was just the tip of a gigantic iceberg. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "And what about the dress? What about that jade green dress? Why could it put Clara in that state?" Matthew was silent for a long time. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, his face etched with deep anguish. It seemed that having to remember this was a torture for him. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse and distant, as if coming from a painful memory. "Why? Because on the day of the accident, the girl, Lucy, was wearing a dress exactly like it. My body went cold. A chilling coincidence. I could imagine the scene. A rainy afternoon, a young woman in a jade-green dress pedaling down the road, and then a car hurtling towards her. It was all horrible, Matthew continued, his voice trembling as if he himself were reliving that terrifying moment. After Lucy's death, her family came to our house to cause a scene. They didn't believe it was a simple accident. They didn't accept the compensation. Lucy's mother, in her immense grief over losing her daughter, stood in front of our gate and cursed us. She said that if her daughter had died unjustly in that green dress, the daughter of this house would have to live her whole life tormented by it. She cursed Clara, saying that every time she saw or wore a dress of a similar color and style, her daughter's spirit would return to claim her life, and the tragedy would repeat itself. She would have to live in fear, in remorse, for the rest of her life. I held my breath as I listened. A curse. A curse uttered by a mother who had lost her child. It sounded irrational, superstitious, but for Clara in that moment, a terrified, guilt-ridden girl, it was no different from a death sentence hanging over her head. At first, my parents didn't believe it either, Matthew sighed. They thought it was just words spoken in a moment of anger, but then strange things started to happen. Once, a relative who knew nothing about the story gave Clara a nightgown, also jade green. That night, the girl had convulsions and screamed that she saw Lucy coming back, covered in blood, standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her. Since then, the whole family has been terrified. Anything jade green is forbidden in this house. And Clara, she believes the curse is real. For her, that dress is no longer a piece of clothing. It's the embodiment of guilt, of death. Hearing this, I began to understand. I understood Clara's reaction, the panic of my mother-in-law and Matthew when they saw me in that dress. In their eyes, I wasn't wearing a gift, but a deadly curse. I was awakening the demon in Clara's soul. But then another question, a cold question, pierced my mind. I looked directly into Matthew's eyes. My voice no longer trembled. It was strangely sharp. Then why did you buy it? You knew perfectly well it was a forbidden object. You knew it would hurt Clara. Why did you deliberately buy it and send it to me as a gift? My question was like a knife that hit the bullseye of Matthew's heart. He flinched, his gaze evasive, stammering, I just what? I pressed, taking another step forward. You wanted to test it, didn't you? You wanted to see if the curse was real, to see if after almost 10 years, it still had an effect. And you didn't hesitate to use your own wife, the woman who sleeps with you, as a guinea pig for that cruel test, did you? Matthew hung his head. His shoulders trembled. His silence was the most painful confession. I started to laugh, a bitter, sarcastic laugh. My tears flowed, not from self-pity, but from rage. I understood everything. I understood why he had screamed, "You've killed my sister." It wasn't because he feared for Clara's life, but because he was scared. Scared because his test had been a terrible success, scared because he himself had pushed his sister into a panic, and scared because his true face had been exposed. I backed away, looking at the man huddled before me, the husband I once loved and trusted. It turned out that behind that kind and gentle facade hid a terrifying selfishness and cruelty. He loved his sister, but that love was so twisted that he was willing to sacrifice his own wife to satisfy a wicked curiosity. "I'm sorry, Sophia." Matthew looked up, his voice choked. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just thought it had been a long time, that it was all in the past. I didn't expect it to be so serious." "You didn't expect?" I laughed with contempt. "You didn't expect, or you deliberately chose not to think about the consequences. In your eyes, I was just a pawn, a tool for you to test an absurd curse, wasn't I?" I turned away, not wanting to hear another word. The story he told might explain everything, but at the same time, it killed everything that remained in me for this marriage. The love, the trust, it was all shattered. But as I went into my room and slammed the door, another sense of unease took hold of me. Everything seemed to fit. But why did I still feel that something was wrong? If it was simply a psychological curse, why did Clara's reaction resemble a real illness, with convulsions and foaming at the mouth? And the unknown man who called me, why did he speak of punishment? a word that sounds much heavier and more legal than a simple curse. Was it possible that the story Matthew had just told was still not the whole truth? The bedroom door slammed shut behind me, but it couldn't stop Matthew's words from drilling into my mind, as cruel as they were absurd. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, trembling from head to toe as tears streamed down my cheeks. But this time, they weren't tears of frustration or self-pity, but of a complete breakdown. The man to whom I had once given my heart, whom I had always trusted, despite enduring so much bitterness from my mother-in-law, turned out to be capable of using me as a test subject for a wicked experiment. Love? Now that I think about it, it seems ridiculous. In the days following that confrontation, Matthew seemed to sink into his own torment. He was no longer harsh or coldly hateful. Instead, there was a heavy silence, a pathetic avoidance. He didn't dare look me in the eye. Whenever we accidentally crossed paths, he would quickly look away. He started coming home later, and when he did, he would retreat to his study until late at night. Perhaps he was running away, running from my gaze and running from his own guilt. My mother-in-law, however, was not like that. After Matthew confessed everything, she no longer had reason to torment me openly, but her hatred for me transformed into something different, more subtle and persistent. She no longer yelled at me, but every word she said was laced with venom. That's what being a daughter-in-law is like. You make a huge fuss over a little thing and won't give the family any peace. Look at this house, a sick daughter. A daughter-in-law who only knows how to cause trouble. She said these things deliberately when I was nearby, like invisible needles stabbing into my still-open wound. But I no longer cried. The immense pain had hardened my heart. Instead, in the silence and solitude, my mind became strangely clear and lucid. I began to connect all the dots, to analyze every word, every detail of the story Matthew had told. And the more I thought, the more cracks and unexplained contradictions I found. First, Clara's reaction. Matthew said it was due to the psychological trauma of the curse. I could understand the fear, the screams, even the hallucinations, but the convulsions and the foaming at the mouth, those are symptoms of a physical illness. They can't be just the product of psychology. They are more like a bodily reaction to a toxin or an induced epileptic seizure. Could it be that Clara's illness wasn't just trauma, but something more tangible? Second, the strange herbal tea that my mother-in-law prepared for Clara every day. If it was just a tranquilizer to help her sleep, why did she have to do it so secretly and carefully? Why did she never tell me what it was? I remembered the pungent smell of the infusion. It didn't resemble any calming tea, I knew. I took out the herb dregs I had hidden and searched online for medicinal plants, trying to compare the shape and smell, but it was futile. It was a mixture of too many plants I couldn't identify. And finally, the unknown man who called me. His words, the punishment of the past, didn't sound like he was referring to a superstition. It seemed more like an allusion to a sentence, a legal consequence. If Clara was just a 16-year-old girl who caused an accident out of panic, why use a word as heavy as punishment? The cracks in Matthew's story were growing wider, turning the truth he had just revealed into an even more elaborate and deceptive farce. I realized he might have told a part of the truth, but only a small part used to cover up another, much more horrible truth. This family wasn't just hiding a tragedy, they were staging a play, and Clara was the unwitting lead actress. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I knew Matthew would never tell me the whole truth, and my mother-in-law even less so. I had to find the answers myself. I started with the newspaper clippings. They listed the victim's name, Lucy Alvarez, a student at the School of Education. I decided to go to that university. I hoped to find some information about the unfortunate girl's friends or family. Maybe they could tell me something my husband's family was trying to hide. I made an excuse that I was going to visit my family for a few days so I could leave freely. Matthew didn't object. He just nodded silently. Perhaps he also wanted some space to avoid me. Before I left, I paused at the door and looked back at the house. It was no longer a home. It looked like a giant cage that imprisoned not only Clara but also guilty secrets. And I, a wife, a daughter-in-law, now felt like an amateur detective embarking on a dangerous investigation, not knowing what awaited me. I only knew one thing. I would not stop until the last veil of deceit was lifted. Leaving that suffocating house, I felt like a prisoner finally breathing fresh air, but that freedom came with a heavy anxiety. I didn't go to my parents' house. I didn't want to involve my family in this mess. Instead, I rented a small, simple room near downtown New York City, using it as a base for my own investigation. The next morning, I went to Columbia University. 10 years is a long time. Everything had changed. New buildings, young students' faces, no trace of the past. I wandered around the campus, feeling lost and helpless about where to start. I decided to go to the student records office, hoping to find old files. I made up a story that I was an old classmate of Lucy's, that we had lost touch, and that I now wanted to find information to visit her family. The young clerk looked at me suspiciously, but perhaps seeing the sincerity in my words, she agreed to help. After rummaging through a dusty archive, she pulled out a yellowed file. "Here is the information for student Lucy Alvarez, but she passed away in an accident a long time ago." I tried to contain my emotion. My voice trembled. "I know. Could you give me her family's address or any contact information for her relatives?" The clerk shook her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Due to regulations, we cannot disclose students' personal information. Besides, after Lucy's passing, the family moved, and the university also lost contact." I felt devastated. The only lead I had ended in a dead end. I left the records office and wandered aimlessly around the campus. The wind blew gently, carrying the laughter of students, which only accentuated my loneliness. I sat on a stone bench under the shade of a tree, my mind blank. Would all my efforts end here? Would I have to return to that house and accept living in deceit and torment for the rest of my life? Just as I was sinking into despair, a figure quietly sat down next to me. I didn't pay attention, absorbed in my own thoughts, until that person spoke with a deep, hoarse voice, the same voice I had heard on the phone. "You're looking for Lucy, aren't you?" I looked up sharply. The man sitting next to me was in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face marked by the wrinkles of time. But his eyes were deep and held an infinite sadness. I recognized him, though I had never seen him before, but his melancholic appearance and his distinctive voice were unmistakable. He was the man who had called me. Frightened, I tried to get up to leave, but he held my arm. His hand was thin but firm. "Don't be afraid, young lady. I mean you no harm. I've been following you since you entered this university." Who are you?" I stammered. "Why are you following me? Why did you call me?" The man didn't answer immediately. He looked into the distance, as if his gaze pierced through space and time, returning to a distant memory. Then, slowly, he said each word like a heavy stone dropping into a calm lake. "I am her father. I am Lucy Alvarez's father." My world stopped. I sat frozen, unable to utter a word. The man in front of me, whom I had mistaken for some shady character, was the victim's father, the man who had suffered the loss of his daughter in the tragedy 10 years ago. My fear dissipated, replaced by a strange compassion and empathy. He turned to look at me, his eyes red. "I know you're the daughter-in-law of Matthew's family. I know you live in that house, and I also know that you're trying to find out the truth." "Sir, how do you know?" He smiled sadly. "In these 10 years, there hasn't been a single day that I've stopped searching. I don't believe my daughter died in such a senseless way. I've been investigating secretly, gathering information little by little. I know that girl, Clara, was the one driving. I also know that her family used money to silence everyone, but I don't have enough solid evidence to reopen the case." He sighed, his voice full of helplessness. "I was about to give up until you appeared. I saw you marry into that family. I thought maybe fate was giving me a chance. I followed you. I watched you. I saw how they treated you unfairly. I saw the suffering in your eyes. And when you started investigating on your own, I knew you were the only one who could help me, help my daughter find justice." My tears welled up. I never expected that on my lonely journey, an elderly father was also fighting silently. We, two strangers, one seeking the truth for herself, the other seeking justice for his daughter, were brought together by fate. "The call that day," he continued, "I made it on purpose to warn you, and also to test you. I wanted to see if you had the courage to keep going, and you haven't disappointed me." I wiped my tears and looked him straight in the eye. My voice no longer trembled. "Sir, I don't know what I can do, but I promise you, I will not give up. I will do it not just for me, but for Lucy and for you." The old man nodded, his lips trembling. He squeezed my hand tightly. "Thank you, my child, but you have to be very careful. That family is not as simple as you think. The truth you're looking for is much more horrible than a simple traffic accident." His last sentence once again planted a vague unease in my heart. More than an accident. What else was hidden behind Lucy's death? I sat silently next to Mr. Alvarez, Lucy's father, trying to process the information I had just received. The campus wind continued to blow, rustling the leaves in the trees, but in my ears, only the echo of his words resonated. The truth is much more horrible than a simple traffic accident. My heart clenched. A bad premonition seized every cell in my body. I looked at the old father's sunken, pained eyes, and with a trembling voice asked, "What do you mean by that? Wasn't it that Clara caused the accident unintentionally?" Mr. Alvarez shook his head vehemently. His dry lips moved as if he were carefully choosing each word to reveal a truth that had been buried for too long. "No, Sophia. My daughter did not die in a common accident. The story that Matthew told you is only half of a lie." I held my breath. My entire body tensed like a violin string. Mr. Alvarez took a deep breath, his gaze lost in the distance, his voice hoarse as if it came from hell itself. "It's true that Clara was in the car that caused the accident that day, but she wasn't the one driving. I felt as if an electric shock ran through me. It wasn't Clara. Then who?" My instinct whispered something terrible, something I didn't dare to think. "The person who was really driving that car," Mr. Alvarez said, each syllable laden with an evident hatred in his bloodshot eyes, "was your husband. It was Matthew. It was as if I had been struck by lightning. I was stunned, my mind reeling. Matthew, my husband, the kind and gentle man I once loved with all my heart, was the real culprit." "No, it can't be," I stammered, trying to deny this cruel truth. "You must be mistaken. Matthew wouldn't. He loves his sister so much. He couldn't—" "Loves her?" Mr. Alvarez scoffed with a twisted, bitter smile. "Yes, he loves his sister, but he loves himself 1,000,000 times more. He sacrificed his own sister to escape the blame, to get to where he is today." He told me the story, his voice trembling with indignation. "According to what I've been able to find out in my secret investigation, through the few remaining witnesses, those whom Matthew's family silenced with money that day in the car, it wasn't just Clara. Matthew was there too. He was the one driving. Back then, Matthew was barely 20. He was an impulsive, wild young man. That day, the two siblings had a huge fight in the car," Mr. Alvarez recounted, clenching his fists so tightly the veins stood out. "It seems it was about money. Matthew wanted money from the family for some venture, but his parents were against it. Clara, sitting next to him, tried to calm him down. In a fit of rage and out of control, he floored the gas pedal and drove like a madman in the rain. And then the tragedy happened. After causing the accident and seeing my daughter lying motionless in a pool of blood, Matthew panicked. He knew that if the truth came out, his future, his career, would be ruined. And in that cruel moment, he made a decision even more wicked than the accident itself. He placed all the blame on his 16-year-old sister. I covered my mouth, unable to believe what I was hearing. A knot formed in my throat, and I felt nauseous. The husband I thought was kind turned out to be a coward, a demon disguised as a man. He turned his sister into a shield, into a psychiatric patient, to hide his own crime. Matthew's family, especially your mother-in-law, Mr. Alvarez continued, were accomplices to their son. They staged a perfect farce. They told everyone, and Clara herself, that she was the one driving. The shock and the false sense of guilt, combined with the high doses of tranquilizers your mother-in-law gave her daily, gradually destroyed the girl's mind. They turned a healthy girl into a true patient, a living doll, mired in fear and trauma, just to protect their precious son. Now I understood everything. I understood why the window in Clara's room had bars, why she had to sleep in a hospital bed. It wasn't to protect her, but to imprison her, to prevent her from having contact with the outside world, to ensure the secret never came to light. I understood why my mother-in-law had to prepare that tea in secret. It was a poison that killed Clara's mind and memories. And Matthew's scream, "You've killed my sister," on that fateful night now had a completely different meaning, a disgusting and false meaning. He wasn't afraid for Clara's life. He was afraid that the dress, the trigger for her trauma, would make Clara remember something. Afraid that the farce his family had built for 10 years would crumble because of a stupid gift he himself had brought. I lowered my head. Tears fell onto the cold ground. I wasn't just crying for Lucy, the girl who had died unjustly. I wasn't just crying for myself, a deceived wife. I was also crying for Clara, a victim, a soul imprisoned and destroyed by her loved ones. I looked up at Mr. Alvarez. My voice no longer trembled but was filled with a steely anger and determination. "Sir, we have to save Clara. We have to bring this truth to light." Mr. Setter, Alvarez's words were like a flood that washed away everything I had known, everything I had believed about my husband's family. The truth was not just horrible, it was so disgusting and inhuman that no words could fully describe it. I sat frozen on the stone bench. The campus wind continued to blow, but I felt nothing anymore. In my head was only the image of Matthew, my kind husband, with another face, the face of a cold-blooded killer, and the image of Clara, not as a sick sister-in-law, but as a victim imprisoned in her own family's tragedy. "Mr. Alvarez looked at me with compassionate eyes. "I know this is too great a shock for you, but you must be strong, Sophia. You are the only person in that house who can get close to Clara, who can save her." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the nausea rising in my throat. But how can I save her?" I asked with a helpless voice. "Clara doesn't even know she's being harmed. For 10 years, she has lived believing she was the killer. They've poisoned her mind. How can I make her believe the truth?" That's the key point, the cruelest part of Matthew's family's plan. They didn't just blame Clara. They turned her into a real psychiatric patient by constantly instilling in her the idea that she was guilty, that she was traumatized. Combined with the effects of high-potency tranquilizers disguised as herbal teas, they managed to break her will and erase her memories. Clara can no longer distinguish between real and fake. She is completely dependent on the care and guidance of her mother and brother, the very people she believes love and protect her. "The strange allergy to fabrics," I murmured, a painful truth suddenly illuminated in my mind. That was also just a lie. Mr. Alvarez nodded. "Exactly. It was the perfect excuse for them to completely control Clara's life. They created a trigger for the illness-common fabrics to justify her confinement. That way, they could prevent Clara from communicating with the outside world, prevent anyone from awakening her memories. The girl could only wear expensive silk clothes prepared by her own mother, eat what her mother cooked, and drink the medicine her mother prepared. Everything began to fit together like a complete puzzle. The pieces that once seemed illogical now fit perfectly, creating a chilling conspiracy. And the dress, the jade green dress, I now understood its true purpose. Matthew didn't give it to me to stupidly test a curse as he had invented. It was a cruel and calculated psychological test. After almost 10 years, perhaps Matthew and my mother-in-law wanted to check how deeply ingrained Clara's illness was. They wanted to see Clara's reaction to seeing another person, her sister-in-law, wearing the object of her trauma. They wanted to know if Clara would still react violently as before, or if time had faded that fear. If Clara didn't react, maybe they would slowly relax their control. But if Clara fell ill, it would prove that their farce was still working, and they would have to continue imprisoning her in that invisible cage. And Matthew's scream, "You've killed my sister." That scream wasn't out of panic for Clara's life. It was a scream of fear. Fear that the puppet he had so carefully constructed for 10 years would react unexpectedly. He feared that Clara's convulsions were not from trauma, but a sign that real memories were resurfacing, fighting to get out. He feared his play was about to end. I shivered. The truth was even crueler than I could have imagined. Matthew wasn't just a coward. He was a director, a cold-blooded psychological manipulator. He had turned his own sister into a lab rat in his family's sick experiment. I looked at Mr. Alvarez. My voice trembled with indignation. "The medicine my mother-in-law gives Clara." "What is it, sir?" Mr. Alvarez sighed. "I'm not entirely sure, but from what I've been able to find out, it could be a type of neuroleptic, or worse, a drug that causes memory loss with long-term use. It keeps her in a drowsy, confused state, unable to think clearly. It's the main tool they use to control her." The herb dregs I had hidden. I suddenly remembered that this was the only physical evidence I had. "Sir," I said, as a plan began to form in my head, "I have to go back to that house. I can't abandon Clara. I have to find a way to get a sample of that medicine and have it analyzed. And I have to find a way to talk to Clara." Mr. Alvarez looked at me worriedly. "It's very dangerous, Sophia. Now that they know you suspect something, they won't let you act so easily." "I know," I nodded, an unprecedented determination in my eyes. "But if I don't do it, no one can save Clara. She has suffered too much. It's time she knew the truth, no matter how painful." I knew my biggest challenge now was not confronting Matthew or my mother-in-law, but how to approach and awaken a soul that had been imprisoned in darkness for 10 years, a soul that didn't even know it was a prisoner. Returning to that house after talking with Mr. Alvarez, I felt like I was walking into the lion's den. Everything was the same facade of false peace, but now in my eyes, every corner, every object was stained with guilt. Matthew's gaze towards me was no longer just evasive, but also wary. My mother-in-law watched me even more closely. She barely let me out of her sight, as if she feared I would do something terrible. But the more alert they were, the more cunning I had to be. I knew I couldn't be rash. The first thing I had to do was get a sample of the medicine. I waited patiently. For several days, I pretended to have accepted my fate, returning to being the quiet, hard-working daughter-in-law. I stopped confronting them, stopped showing my frustration. My change in attitude seemed to relax Matthew and my mother-in-law's vigilance a bit. The opportunity came one afternoon. My mother-in-law had to go to the town hall for some business. She tasked me with looking after Clara, but didn't forget to lock her bedroom door as usual. As soon as I heard the sound of her car driving away, I acted. I ran to the kitchen, where she used to prepare the infusion. Luckily, there was still a bit of yesterday's concentrate left in the teapot. Carefully, using a small syringe I had prepared, I drew a little, put it in a clean glass vial, and hid it well. With the sample in my possession, my heart beat faster, but I knew this was only the first step. The biggest challenge lay ahead. How to talk to Clara? Her bedroom door was always locked. I couldn't use the old set of keys again. They had surely taken precautions. I paced back and forth in the hallway, my nerves on edge. Suddenly, I remembered a detail. Clara's room and Matthew's study shared a small balcony, separated only by a low wall. If I could get into Matthew's study, I tiptoed down and tried the doorknob to the study. Locked. I was about to despair, but then my gaze fell on the small ventilation grill above the door. It had no bars. I looked around and saw a stool in a corner. A bold idea occurred to me. I knew it was very risky, but I had no other choice. I placed the stool and shakily climbed up. Since I'm petite, I was luckily able to squeeze through the grill. I landed inside Matthew's study with my heart pounding. I ran to the balcony. Just as I thought, I only had to climb over the small wall to get to the balcony of Clara's room. The balcony door to Clara's room was unlocked. I opened it gently and went inside. Clara was sitting on the bed with her back to me, her long hair falling over her thin shoulders. She was humming a familiar tune, a clear yet unsettling melody. I took a deep breath and called her name softly. "Clara!" Clara jumped and turned abruptly. When she saw me, her eyes widened in evident panic. She shrank back, retreating to a corner of the bed, clutching her head. "You! How did you get in here? Mom said no one could come in." I approached slowly, holding out my hands to show her I meant no harm. "Clara, don't be afraid. I just want to talk to you." "No, go away," Clara cried in a pitiful voice. "It's your fault. It's all your fault. You brought that dress. You called her. She's here. I see her." The girl began to tremble violently, her gaze fixed on an empty spot behind me. I knew her hallucination had returned. I sat beside her, my heart aching, trying to keep my voice as gentle as possible. "Clara, there's no one here. It's just you and me. Look carefully. She's not there." Clara became more and more terrified. I knew that if this continued, I couldn't tell her anything. I had to do something to snap her out of her hallucination. Suddenly, I remembered the old rag doll I had seen in the secret box. "Clara," I said quickly, "do you remember your rag doll? The doll you used to sleep with?" Hearing about the doll, Clara paused. Her tremors seemed to lessen a bit. Her gaze was no longer lost in the void, but fixed on me with a hint of bewilderment. "Doll? How do you know?" "I know. And I also know about the butterfly hair clip, the one with the broken wing. You hid them in a wooden box under your bed, didn't you, Clara?" Clara was completely astonished. She stared at me. The fear in her eyes was gradually replaced by curiosity. How do you know these things?" I knew this was the moment. I took her cold hand. "Clara, trust me. Everything you're seeing, everything you're feeling, isn't real. You are not guilty. You didn't kill anyone." "No!" Clara screamed again, pulling her hand away. "It was me. I drove the car. I killed her," Mom and Matthew told me. "They lied to you," I said loudly, firmly. "They have been deceiving you for 10 years. The person driving that day wasn't you. Don't you remember, Clara? Try to remember who else was in the car that day." I tried to awaken Clara's memories, but they seemed to be buried too deep. She just clutched her head and shook it vigorously as tears streamed down her face. I don't remember anything. My head hurts. Go away, please. Go away." Seeing Clara's pain and anguish, I knew I couldn't push her any further. Her mind was too fragile. I backed away. My voice choked. "Okay, I'll go. But Clara, remember what I told you. You are not guilty. Trust yourself. Don't believe what they tell you." I turned around and jumped back over the balcony. Just as I was entering Matthew's study, I heard the sound of my mother-in-law's car arriving at the gate. My heart almost leaped out of my chest. I quickly squeezed back through the ventilation grill, put the stool back, and ran to my room, trying to catch my breath. I had failed in my attempt to awaken Clara, but I knew my words were like little seeds planted in the arid soil of her soul. They might not sprout immediately, but with a chance, with a strong enough push, they would grow. And I didn't know that chance would come in a way no one could have foreseen. The days following my secret encounter with Clara passed in a tense calm. I didn't dare do anything else for fear of alerting them. My mother-in-law didn't seem to discover that I had snuck into the room, but she watched Clara even more closely. She barely left the house and was always by her side. Clara remained the same, silent and absent, but sometimes I would catch her looking at me, a confused, fearful, and curious gaze, as if she were trying to find an answer. I knew my words had had an effect, but they needed a final push. Meanwhile, I secretly sent the medicine sample to Mr. Alvarez. He promised to have it analyzed at a trusted lab and give me the results as soon as possible. I could only wait. Every day felt like an eternity. And then that push came, not from me, but from Matthew himself. That night, Matthew came home completely drunk. He didn't lock himself in his study as usual, but collapsed in the living room, drinking straight from a bottle of brandy. My mother-in-law, seeing him, went to scold him. "What's wrong with you, son? What happened to make you drink like this?" Matthew didn't answer, just took another big gulp. Suddenly, he burst into tears. Choked, heart-wrenching sobs from a man who had been holding back for too long. "Mom, I'm so tired. I don't want to live like this anymore. I failed her, and I failed Clara too." Isabel, scared, tried to cover his mouth. "Are you crazy? What nonsense are you talking about? Someone might hear you." I was hiding behind the staircase. My heart pounded. I heard every word. In his drunken state, Matthew's respectable facade had completely crumbled, revealing a soul eaten away by guilt. The argument grew louder. Matthew, drunk, yelled, "I don't want to keep deceiving her. I don't want to see Clara live like a ghost. It's all my fault. It's all my fault." Those shouts reached Clara's room. The door to her room burst open. Clara stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror. She had heard everything. The memory of our conversation, combined with her brother's drunken confession, seemed to be too great a shock. Clara clutched her head, let out a heart-rending scream, and collapsed on the floor, unconscious. The house was once again plunged into chaos. Matthew sobered up instantly, and together with my mother-in-law, they rushed Clara to the hospital. This time, I didn't just stand by. I knew this was the only chance. I ran after them to the car, insisting on going. I have to go. What happened to her has to do with me, too. Perhaps due to the confusion, Matthew and my mother-in-law didn't stop me. On the way to the hospital, I received a text from Mr. Alvarez. He had the analysis results. Just as we suspected, the medicine Clara took daily contained a potent neuroleptic. Its prolonged use could cause memory loss, hallucinations, and total dependence. It was what had turned Clara into their puppet. At the hospital, after emergency treatment, Clara regained consciousness, but she was no longer the same. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just lay there with her gaze fixed on the ceiling, empty and soulless. The doctor said she had suffered a very severe psychological shock and needed specialized treatment. I knew I had to act immediately. I called Mr. Alvarez and told him everything. He said instantly, "Sophia, this is our golden opportunity. I'll contact a friend who works at the best psychiatric clinic in the city. We have to take Clara there, away from the control of her mother and brother. Only then will she have a chance to heal." We devised a bold plan. We would take advantage of a moment of carelessness from Matthew and Isabel to sneak Clara out of the hospital. I knew it was incredibly risky, almost a kidnapping, but we had no other choice. That night, I stayed at the hospital with Clara. Matthew and my mother-in-law had gone home for more things. I sat by her bed, took her cold hand, and whispered, "Clara, it's me. Can you hear me? Trust me. I'll get you out of here. I'll help you get your life back." Clara didn't react, but I saw a single, clear tear roll slowly down her cheek. My heart ached. I knew that deep inside that soulless shell, Clara was still listening. She still longed to be free. The next morning, very early, when the hospital corridors were almost empty, Mr. Alvarez was waiting with a car at the back entrance. I led Clara, who was still in a daze, out through the emergency exit. Every step was heavy. My heart pounded. I kept looking back, fearing that Matthew and my mother-in-law would appear at any moment. Just as we reached the back door, a familiar figure blocked our path. It was Matthew. My heart almost leaped out of my chest. He had discovered us. It was over. Matthew looked at me, then at Clara, leaning on my shoulder. His face was pale, full of torment. I held Clara tightly, preparing for a struggle. But no, Matthew didn't lunge at us. He just stood there, looking at us for a long time, and then said in a hoarse voice, "Take her. Take good care of her." I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was letting us go. Matthew came closer and pressed a thick wallet into my hand. "Here's some money. Consider it a part of my redemption. Take Clara to the best place. Save her. I'm begging you." With that, he turned and walked away quickly, as if fleeing, his lonely, hunched back under the faint light of dawn. I stood there with tears in my eyes. I didn't know whether to be happy or sad. Matthew had finally made a choice, a late one, but perhaps the only right thing he could do at that moment. I helped Clara into the car. The car started, taking us far from the city, far from the painful past, toward an uncertain future. I knew this escape was just the beginning. The road to healing for Clara, and for me, would be long and difficult. The car took Clara and me far away, leaving behind the city full of painful memories. I looked at Clara, who was still sitting silently, her gaze lost out the window, but her hand was clinging to mine, a weak but trusting grip. Matthew's final act, as unexpected as it was bitter, had stirred a whirlwind of emotions in my heart. He had finally chosen the side of conscience, but could the wound he and his family had caused be healed with just a little money and a late plea? We arrived at the psychiatric clinic recommended by Mr. Alvarez. It was a quiet, secluded place, nestled among green hills. The air was pure and serene, a stark contrast to the suffocating and oppressive atmosphere of Matthew's house. The doctors immediately admitted Clara. After seeing the medication analysis results and hearing my full account, the head of psychiatry told me, with a voice full of compassion, but also seriousness, "Miss Clara's case is very complex. She has been psychologically and physically poisoned for too long. The treatment process will be difficult and will require a lot of time. The most important thing now is to completely isolate her from the people who caused her trauma." I stayed at the clinic with Clara. The first few days were the hardest. Clara barely spoke, huddling in a corner. The doctors had to resort to intensive psychological therapies to slowly break through the shell she had built around herself. I was always by her side, telling her happy stories, reading her books, and waiting patiently. Meanwhile, Mr. Alvarez did not stop. He officially filed a police report against Matthew's family, attaching all the evidence we had gathered, the lab results, the old newspaper clippings, and my own testimony. A month later, when Clara began to show the first signs of improvement, when she started speaking again, even if only in short sentences, I received a call from Mr. Alvarez. He told me the police had opened an investigation and wanted to summon all parties involved for a confrontation, including Clara. Clara's doctors, after consultation, agreed. They thought it could be a necessary shock therapy to help Clara face her past and truly overcome it. On the day of the confrontation, in a police station interrogation room, the tension was suffocating. I sat on one side, tightly holding Clara's hand. She was trembling, but her eyes no longer held emptiness, but fear mixed with a hint of determination. On the other side of the table were Matthew and his mother, Isabel. Matthew was haggard, with sunken eyes, his face marked by exhaustion and guilt. Isabel no longer had that fierce, cunning appearance from before. She sat silently, her hair much grayer, her shoulders slumped like someone completely defeated. When the detective began to ask questions, Isabel broke down in tears. She denied nothing. She made no excuses. She admitted everything. She admitted to conspiring with her son to fabricate Clara's illness and cover up Matthew's guilt. She admitted to giving Clara high doses of neuroleptics for 10 years. Crying, she said in a broken voice, "I just wanted to protect my son. Matthew was the family's only hope. I couldn't let him go to jail. I know I was wrong. I destroyed my daughter's life. I'm so sorry." Matthew, beside her, kept his head down, not daring to look at anyone. He also confessed to all his actions. He admitted that he was the one driving, that he blamed his sister, and that he used me for his cruel experiment. His voice trembled with remorse. "I was a coward. I destroyed everyone's lives. I will accept any punishment from the law." The confrontation was no longer a dispute. It became a tear-soaked confession. But the person I was most worried about at that moment was Clara. She sat there, listening to every word. Her face was pale, her lips trembled. The suppressed memories, the scattered pieces of the past, seemed to be returning, fitting together into a complete and painful picture. Finally, the detective turned to Clara with a gentle voice. "Miss Clara, do you have anything to say?" Clara slowly raised her head. For the first time in a long time, she looked directly at her mother and brother. Her eyes no longer showed fear or hatred. It was a look full of pain and disappointment. Then she spoke. Her voice was weak but clear, each word like a knife cutting the silence. "Why?" "Just one question. Why?" Isabel screamed, trying to crawl towards her daughter. "Clara, I'm sorry." Mom was wrong. Matthew also looked up, his face bathed in tears. "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm a terrible brother." But Clara just shook her head. She stood up and gripped my hand tightly. She said nothing more, simply turned around and walked out of the room with me. The door closed behind us, leaving behind two people submerged in late remorse and indelible guilt. As we left, Clara rested her head on my shoulder. Her body trembled. I knew this was just the beginning of her healing journey. Facing the truth was incredibly painful, but it was a necessary step for her to truly be reborn, and I would always be by her side to get through this storm with her. I hadn't saved my marriage, but at least I had saved a soul. After that fateful confrontation, everything happened as expected. The curtain of the 10-year-long farce collapsed completely, leaving nothing that could be hidden. Matthew, charged with involuntary manslaughter and giving false testimony, had to face the full force of the law. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't want to witness that scene. I didn't want to reopen wounds that were already too deep. I stayed quietly at the clinic, holding Clara's hand, watching together through the window as the golden sun spread over the green treetops. My marriage to Matthew also came to an end. We divorced silently, without pleas, without resentment. Between us, only a painful truth and an emptiness that could never be filled remained. He had to pay for his sins. And I also paid a very high price for my innocence and my blind trust. Isabel, after losing her son and daughter in different ways, completely broke down. She sold the estate in the Hudson Valley, that place full of guilty secrets, and moved alone to her hometown. Sometimes Mr. Alvarez would tell me she was seen coming and going silently, speaking to no one. The pride and power of yesteryear had vanished, leaving only a lonely old woman consumed by late remorse in the final years of her life. Perhaps that was the sentence of her conscience, a sentence heavier than prison bars. As for Clara, her healing journey was a long and thorny path. Facing the truth that she was not a murderer but a victim of her loved ones was an immense shock. There were times when she fell into depression, times when she became enraged and broke everything. But the doctors and I did not give up. I was always by her side, listening, sharing, and using sincere love to warm her frozen heart. Little by little, Clara began to open up. She started to read, to learn to paint, and to find joy in small things. Her smile, though still strained, began to reappear on her pale lips. One day, she showed me a painting she had just finished. It was a picture of two women holding hands, walking towards the sun. One was her, and the other was me. Underneath the painting, in trembling handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for pulling me out of the darkness." Seeing the painting, I couldn't hold back my tears. All the effort, all the pain, seemed to vanish in that instant. As for me, after the divorce, I didn't return to the bustling city life. I decided to stay in this quiet land, where I found Clara and where I found myself. With the help of Mr. Alvarez and the money Matthew had given me, I opened a small flower shop. The work didn't bring in much money, but it brought me peace. Every day, caring for the flowers, watching them bloom, I felt as if my own soul was also healing. Mr. Alvarez, after getting justice for his daughter, also found peace. He no longer lived tormented by remorse and hatred. He treated Clara and me like his own family. On weekends, he would often stop by the flower shop, bringing us vegetables from his garden. 3 people, 3 different destinies. We had weathered the biggest storm of our lives together, and now we supported each other to move forward. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still remember that jade green dress, the fateful gift that pushed me into a dead-end tragedy. But it was also what helped me uncover a horrible truth, save a soul, and find my own path. I realized that in life, sometimes the worst things happen to make way for better things. I lost a family, a marriage, but in return, I gained the truth, the freedom of my soul, and a sister whom I will love and protect for the rest of my life. Standing in front of my flower shop, looking at the sunflowers that always stand proud, facing the sun, I smiled. The storm always passes, and after the rain, the sky is blue again. My life, and Clara's, will only look towards the light from now on.